The Shards by Bret Easton Ellis. A flawed novel about rich privileged teens experimenting with drugs in LA that didn't live up to the potential of the great American novelist. A teenage Brett and his uber-privileged friends cruise around 80s LA while a serial killer stalks the city in a gleefully meta return to form by the author of American Psycho. The shocks come fast in Bret Easton Ellis' first novel in 13 years. The Shards is prefaced by a sweetly sincere, or is it? It's been a dozen years since Bret Easton Ellis published a novel, and his latest, The Shards, is a narrative that came to him in 1981, more than 4 decades ago, when he was a 17-year-old high school senior. Hermetic, paranoid, sleek, dark, and with brief explosions of the sex and violence that have characterized Ellis's oeuvre, The Shards is a stark reminder that the American Psycho author is a genre unto himself. Some say that this novel is puerile, prurient, and pretentious, and as for redeeming features, it has none, while others say it was worth the wait. Let's see what hides inside, and after reading the book, come back to this video and tell us your thoughts in the comments. But first, let's peek inside. Brett is a 17-year-old senior at Buckley, a prestigious LA prep school. He hangs out with the cool crowd, has an attractive girlfriend, lives mostly alone in his own world in his rich parents' house, and drives a Mercedes 450 SL. His life is about parties, working on his first novel, secret sex with men, and dreaming of leaving LA behind while floating aimlessly through the life of wealthy and popular in LA's best neighborhoods. However, that changes when a new student with a mysterious past arrives at Buckley. Robert Mallory, who Brett is sure he has seen before, is handsome, comfortable with himself, and extremely alluring, but he's also a bit strange and enigmatic. When Brett learns that Robert spent 6 months in a mental institution, he becomes convinced that newcomer is hiding a terrible secret from Brett and his friends. While Brett's senior year rushes toward its inevitable end, he becomes obsessed with the Trawler, a serial killer who's kidnapping and brutally murdering young women in LA and who seems to be coming closer and closer to Brett and his friends. Brett struggles to cope with the mysterious death, or murder, of one of his lovers while also becoming entangled with his girlfriend's father and obsessing about Robert, whose narrative seems to be on a collision course with that of the Trawler. This, a bit over 600 pages book, talks about a lot of things. More than one narrative, Ellis weaves in and out of multiple stories. Brett's relationships and secret homosexuality, his writing and possible work on a script for his girlfriend's father, the Trawler's vicious crimes, Robert Mallory's effect on Brett's group of friends, drug use, and a lot more. Despite the multiplicity of intertwining narratives, Ellis masterfully keeps Brett at the center of everything, and the narrator's voice, not to mention his growing paranoia, is more than enough to keep the readers turning pages. This is a novel that simultaneously occupies a few different spaces. Parts of it seem like a crime novel and others like a very dark, sexualized, drug-infused coming-of-age story. But there is also a lot of humor, a deep, scathing look at privilege, and a very personal exploration of the things that haunt us, the way distrust affects us, and how sex, growing up, jealousy, fear, and obsession can shape the life of someone at the cusp of their teenage years. Similarly, the story delves deep into what Brett sees as the performance of everyday life, the way everything is a narrative, a pantomime, a script. Lastly, and perhaps more noticeable than anything else, The Shards is a very personal work of metafiction in which Bret Easton Ellis shares not only a name with his narrator, but also a novel less than zero, a plethora of identity markers and obsessions. and a school, since the author's photo used for this novel is from Ellis's 1982 yearbook from Buckley School. And the metafiction doesn't end with the obvious similarities between Ellis and his character. The novel is also very aware of itself, and the writing shows that. Perhaps the only element that isn't constantly enjoyable here is the endless detail, since there are constant descriptions of places, the cars everyone drives, what they wear, full recollections of long conversations that go nowhere, the streets Brett drives through aimlessly, a mall, etc. Brett talks about the writing of his novel, explaining that it's about him but that it didn't have a story. He says that it didn't have a narrative exactly and that there was just a drifting numb quality that he was trying to perfect. At another time, Brett dissects a song and finds it too long, but also an abstraction, poetry that could mean anything to anyone, as he says. And that ultimately is what the Shards is. This is Ellis's novel, but it's also a mirror that invites the reader to look at what makes them tick, a vessel full of meanings that readers will extract depending on who they are. On the surface, The Shards is a relatively simple story about an obsessive young man learning to navigate the interstitial space between being a teenager and adulthood. However, it's also much more. It's about obsession, the masks everyone wears as they go through life, and how isolation exacerbates paranoia, and one that could only have come from Bret Easton Ellis. A pleasingly slippery, impish author, Ellis uses all the up-to-date auto-fictional techniques to far more exciting effects. Prone to an overactive writerly imagination, he has begun writing his 1985 debut, Less Than Zero, and often high on Valium, Quaaludes, weed, or cocaine. Brett begins to wonder if Robert is as innocent as he seems. Imagine in 1981, from the depths of America's stigma today, the nearly 60-year-old author recalls a golden age of quarterbacks and homecoming queens, an era of imperial entitlement when gilded white novelists weren't expected to imagine the interior lives of the Latin help, and no one really cared if the country club was racist. Some of the kids from the book grow up slowly while others become adults in no time, but what connects them all is that although they're all rich, each of them deals with day-to-day problems, no matter how much money they have. It's not something that can fulfill their souls, so they often feel very lonely and quite abandoned in a way. Some of them are left behind while their parents are on world trips. Some are in New York, one's mother is in Europe, and so on. So nobody really takes care of them. They give them everything but love, which what all of those kids actually need the most. If we believe that Bret Easton Ellis has a talent as a writer, it's creating what we refer to in slang as a vibe. The book feels like an amalgam of the two books. Much of the plot of The Shards is devoted to Brett's mundane, disengaged 1981 teenage life. He goes to his private school, he hangs out with his girlfriend Debbie, whom he likes but is not really attracted to, as he seems to be gay and conflicted about it. He listens to 80s music, obsesses about a fellow student named Matt, whom he is deeply attracted to and secretly hooking up with. He also ends up in the casting couch with his girlfriend's father, who has promised to help get his novel published. It's a very sad part of the book that, the whole time, he is side-eyeing new student Robert Mallory. Brett claims to think that Robert is up to no good, but his fascination with him almost seems to feel like a romantic obsession. The entire narrative of The Shards is basically a fascinating blend of the mundane and the grotesque. This brings us to the end of today's video. Let us know your thoughts on the book once you read it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and make sure to hit that bell button so you can get notified whenever there's a new book summary ready for you.